Okay. Um, Tripp, Sam, Sarah, and Luke here to talk about emotional manipulation. Um, this is something that I've been thinking about over the last like 10 days, and I posted about it on the Discord. And these are the other three people on the Discord that I would want to chat about it for a couple reasons, and I'll say why. Sam, I think you and I are similar personalities in some ways, so I feel like you're gonna get what I'm doing, and probably have like a mirror image of this tendency on your own. Sarah and Luke are very different than me, um, but I don't feel like they totally are. They don't totally not get me, and then also I feel like whenever they say something, it's usually helpful to me, and I learn something. And so a lot of times when someone's really different than me, they say something and I just totally don't get what they're talking about, and so I just ignore it. So anyway, this is all about me, guys, and what I can learn. So to tee it up, I guess I feel like let's go around the table. When I say emotional manipulation, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you think of? How would you define that?
I'll start, I guess.
Go for it.
When we were coming into this conversation, I felt like I'd have a lot of things to say. And then when we were talking about what is emotional manipulation, I was trying to think of a good way to say it succinctly. And I don't know that there is. I mean, it's so per our conversation this morning, Sam, I mean, I consider, I think probably one of the easiest way to say it would be it's deception, it's lying in some way. And I think it's getting someone to do what you want them to do in a uh, less than honorable way, in a less than virtuous way. It's playing off of potentially, I don't know, however you want to cage it, potentially weaknesses, or it could even be strengths. Someone who is very empathetic and and is and is very compassionate and is always trying to see things from someone else's perspective. If one were so inclined, you could take that virtue in the other person and you could manipulate it to get a desired result. Um, and so in some way, I guess that's probably the most succinct way that I would talk about emotional manipulation is playing with people's, I think playing is probably using it's a transactional way to, I guess I would contrast it that way. It is not communing with someone else in an open and responsive and interactive, um, mutually beneficial, synergistic dance. It's using tools, psychological and emotional tools, to get your perceived ends, which is inherently condescending and I would say somewhat unloving. That's right. Is that succinct? That's not succinct.
That was pretty succinct. I'll try next. Um, Emotional manipulation. So it's like it's easy to imagine what physical manipulation, right, looks like, right? You're using violence or force or threats of violence or force to get what you want. And that could be in a relationship, which is physical abuse, or like when a policeman arrests someone, right? That's using the threat of violence or force to get what they want, and perhaps that is a just and healthy version. Don't mean to start a pacifism discussion, but in a relationship, emotional manipulation is sort of like a more subtle form of something similar or akin to physical manipulation, where you're you're not using the threat of physical pain, or you're not using physical pain, but you're using emotional vulnerabilities or pains or weaknesses to get what you want in a way that isn't fully treating the other person as human, or their needs and their desires as equally important and valid as yours, I guess. Something like that. And it's easier or perhaps more common in a relationship because you learn the other person really well after being married to them for a long time. So you kind of know how to push their buttons in ways that someone who doesn't know them as well wouldn't know how to do. So I guess that's part of it. But like, you know, you could imagine like bullying, right? Non-physical bullying is a form of emotional manipulation, and you can imagine that in like, you know, a middle school setting, or like peer pressure, or those sorts of other things. Or I think there's sort of a family of behaviors that I can imagine that are sort of all related to emotional manipulation. And like cults, like religious cults often use emotional manipulation to get what they want out of people too. And it's sort of like a spiritual emotional manipulation, and particularly playing into spiritual emotion. And like an authoritarian government, you know, kind of mixes physical and emotional manipulation. So, but we're specifically focusing on relationship stuff. So I think it's a willingness to inflict a certain amount of harm on someone, but it's not like physical harm; it's emotional harm, to get them to change their behavior in ways that are, I don't know, I guess are fundamentally selfish.
On a quick thing, I just thought of, so that was interesting, Sam, because I always think of it like the way that I would probably try to emotionally manipulate people would be in a positive way. Like I'd make you try to like me and be really winsome and playful, and then get you to do what I want positively. But I mean, you could also do it really negatively. You could fear, you know, or name calling or bullying, which is just not my temperament at all. but you know, you could do that for sure. So
I think that from my perspective, I tend to see it as very passive aggressive, because that's what I was exposed to just with my parents. Like my mother has tendencies to be emotionally manipulative, and she would admit this. So I watched it play out in my parents' relationship, and I think, and I've picked up on a lot of that as well, which I don't like it when it happens, but it is a way to gain power over the relationship, without taking responsibility for your own part in the conflict. I think a lot of times, even as a teenager, my mother would tell me that I was good at this, which is not what she necessarily want to be told. But she said we would get into, you know, a debate or an argument over something I obviously was in the wrong for doing, and she would come out of the whole situation feeling like she was the one to blame, just based on how I would twist words and bring up past flaws and issues. So it's very tricky, and it's hard to pin down versus a physical manipulation for sure.
Yeah. So for me, this is a term, or like just a thing that I've never thought about before. And so it's a struggle, because I tend to not really think about my emotions all that much. Well, I think about them, but I don't think about them. Like I feel them, but I don't really reflect on them very much. Only insofar as I don't want to feel the negative ones. And so, what I was talking to my pastor, and so he was talking about how he thinks that guys especially have a problem with being vulnerable, right? Talking about things that scare them, and, ways that they've been hurt and that kind of stuff, and talking about them in a way that it's not another person's to blame for it, more like they feel this way. It's an insecurity that they have and they're asking for help. And so that's an uncomfortableness, right? Because you can ask for that and the other person might not respond, right? And so like there's a vulnerability there in not only in saying what you feel, but then also in knowing that the other person may not actually help you. And so instead, you can do one of two things. You can go one side of the pendulum and say, and just not talk about your feelings, right? Not that you won't act, like not that you won't take it out on the other person, like whenever you're feeling, insecure or angry or whatever. But you may not talk about it because that means you're vulnerable and you may need something. The other way that you can do it, and this is what he pointed out to me that I do, because my wife and I, after our miscarriage, we started going to counseling, and like I refused to go to counseling for a long time, because I didn't think we needed it and all this kind of stuff, and so like I just didn't want to. It seemed like a form of weakness to me, to feel like I needed to talk through things. And I feel like, well, we can figure it out on our own. We don't need this. And so I didn't. And so like I did that for a long time. And then after the miscarriage last August, it was clear that we did need it for sure. We needed we needed help. And so we did. And so, then one of the things that came out of the counseling is my wife wants me to talk more about my emotions. Like, how do I feel? Like, not just, about things. And I struggle with this because the kind of guys that I normally see talking about like, well, men need to learn how to talk about how they feel is not the kind of guy that I identify with or want to be like. Like I find those guys kind of like cringy a lot of times, where it's like, okay, if talking about my feelings means like being like this person, no, thank you. I'll pass on that. And so that doesn't help. It makes me not want to. It makes me think that that's a weakness or something. And so anyway, but I realized I realized Kate wanted me to, and so then I started. But what I did was I started emotionally manipulating her. I would selectively bring up how I feel in order to change what she's doing, so I didn't feel that way. Like I wasn't doing it for connection with her or to express vulnerability or anything else like that. That wasn't my primary motivation. My primary motivation was to get her to stop doing the thing that was making me feel that way. So I was weaponizing my own emotions in order to manipulate hers, so that I could like avoid the things that I didn't want to feel, the insecurities that I have. And I never realized this about myself. I never realized that I was really, I've probably been doing it a lot more than I realized that I was doing it. And I never really thought about it. And so I wanted to have a conversation. That's why I want this. So that's what I mean by emotional manipulation, is using your emotions as weapons to get the other person to change what they're doing. And that can come in a lot of forms. It could come maybe in positive forms, which is that's not my MO, right? My MO is not to like, carrot. My mind is very much like this is how you're making me feel, stop it. And this is your fault. So anyway, that's what I mean by it. I don't know. So Luke, you're laughing. Like,
no, I appreciate all this, because I'm almost. It's funny. I wonder how I strike you, because I'm almost the polar opposite, like what you've described. I would be inclined to weaponize vulnerability, because like I can out vulnerable anyone. And then I can use that to be really, I think because it's so uncommon, that immediately being vulnerable is powerful, and it immediately draws people into you. And like I could, if I were so inclined, and I probably have, used vulnerability to essentially woo people, because it's such an intimate thing. And it makes people really like you and trust you, and almost it's almost like a mimetic admiration or something, because you see someone doing this thing that's so uncommon that it can give you a dynamic of power over people almost, and so that's kind of why I was laughing. But it's a
Yeah, I don't have the people like me too much problem for sure. But I have the opposite problem.
well, it just depends on what people are drawn to, you know. There
Well, and then when you're vulnerable with someone, and then you can draw that vulnerability out, then you have, in essence, that control over them too.
Yeah.
You have that piece of information that you can use later down the road to emotionally manipulate them. And I think that can come out really strongly in a husband-wife relationship. It's very tempting when you get into an argument to say, well, what about this that you told me?
Right.
And, you know, weaponizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, I'll share. I mean, I've maybe told you this. This is a pretty personal anecdote, and I think a lot. I mean, nobody that I know is going to watch this anyhow. So, but and I don't mind sharing this, and my wife won't mind either. But it's a I don't know who all I've shared this with, but the reason. So I have a weird relationship to emotional manipulation, and the levels of self-deception are almost endless. And so I'm usually pretty, I'm almost militant against being emotionally manipulative because of all the stuff I was just telling you. So I know how you can use it that way. But you can also be doing it in ways that you just don't see too, which is the danger. So when my wife and I were dating in college, I mean, this isn't like, um, I mean, the really frank way to say it is that I was essentially cheating on her throughout most of college, many different times. And in ways it's such an interesting thing to look back in retrospect, because I was so immature is one way to think about it, but also just self-deceived in a way that I was emotionally manipulating her in many ways, because I would share very, very unconsciously. I kind of portrayed two different images. Well, not even two different images. I portrayed a certain image to my girlfriend, um, you know, now wife at the time, that she essentially thought I was a kind of person that, um, I don't know, what's interesting is I almost said my wife thought I was the kind of person in college that I think to a large degree I am now, but I wasn't then. Like, that person was there and had potential, and in a way, almost at the time, in a weird, twisted kind of, almost like how Jordan Peterson talks about when you lie, you split yourself, and there's a splitting. I was it's almost like it was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. Like, I had almost two personalities going, and I was one with her. And so, like, I would go with her, we would do campus ministry, we would hang out. You know, I was this Christian guy. I was really into it. I knew this stuff intellectually. I came out of small town South Dakota, and I had this split between knowing all these facts. And I mean, this probably explains a lot of where I am now, but I had all this information and knowledge about God and Jesus, and knew way more than all my friends about God. But I was like, but I can also, like, get drunk and party 3 or 4 times a week, and not study and play PlayStation all day, and be essentially a loser. But I could play in both of these worlds, and I didn't see that as being almost literally duplicitous, you know. Uh, and so all that, I don't know, that kind of worked out, and I grew up, and we got married, and we moved, and I mean, it's a long story without going into all the detail of it, but it was very much emotional manipulation. And the crazy thing is like, it wasn't even conscious. Like, I wasn't even trying to do it. It wasn't even that level of manipulation, um but I know that I have that capacity, and it's probably why lying and deception is such a big deal to me, especially self-deception. Because the crazy thing is, and it seems stupid, to almost say it, but like I didn't even know I was doing it.
Yeah.
And you're like, how
No,
could you not know you were doing it?
I completely agree. And this is the realization that I've had over the last like week is I'm doing this and I had no idea that I was doing it.
Yeah.
And it kind of breaks my heart. Like, we've been married 10 years, but like, my wife has had to make a choice between someone who doesn't want to talk about his vulnerability, but will take it out on her if I'm feeling vulnerable or being hurt. And then on the other end, she is between that or him only talking about the things in a way to make her change, to change her. And it's primarily about changing her and not about connecting with her or, and I had no idea I was doing this. This is not something this is not a concept that I'd ever thought about, but I realized that this is totally what I'm doing. I'm not being vulnerable and asking for help and hoping. When I am vulnerable, I'm demanding something, and I'll weaponize my knowledge. I'll weaponize anything I can to get that thing, because I don't want to feel it. I don't want to feel the vulnerability. That's my problem. And so I will argue it. I will cite Bible verses. I'll do all kinds of shit to make her feel a certain way so that she stops making me feel a certain way. And that's my primary goal. That's what I want. I do not want, my goal's not even like, even if I'm not wrong, see, this is the part that's like, I'm really struggling with is that a lot of times I'm not wrong in feeling a certain way. Like a lot of times, like I have been hurt and it's not fair the way I'm being treated. And so that's where yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you say feeling a certain way, is that typically just feeling what? Feeling hurt, feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I have insecurities like everyone else. Like I fear of being rejected, and various things. And so, and based on my wife's background, she makes me feel rejected a lot in ways that sometimes it's a sin on her part, and sometimes it's not a sin on her part. And it's just like an insecurity, like a deep insecurity that I have around some of these things. And so like I feel it and I like want to demand that she stop doing that. And sometimes I'm right. Sometimes she is actually sinning against me in that moment. And sometimes she's not. And sometimes it's a mix of the two. And this is where it becomes complicated for me. And I think Shelly brought this up in the Discord earlier that, she talks about her time in Africa, for instance. She feels like, okay, well, I'm telling you, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but if you don't feel bad, then I kind of judge you for it, right? And I think that's interesting because that's kind of like where I am also, even knowing that I'm being emotionally manipulative and I need to like deal with that sin. I don't know where to draw the line, I guess. Like, if I am being sinned against, am I supposed to pretend that I'm not and to not like, look at the other person whenever they're sinning against me and they don't care that they're sinning against me as if that's not a bad thing and I'm not supposed to care about that and whatever. Like I don't know how to deal with that because I feel like again, I'm being split, right? I don't want to lie. I don't want to like affirm something that I don't think is true. But I also I don't want that to be the primary focus of talking about how I feel either. I don't think that's good. That's a very focused thing. So anyway, that's what I'm struggling with right now is that I think I realize that I'm doing some awful shit. And I don't, but at the same time, how do you hold both of these things in your head? That's what I'm struggling with.
Okay, quick aside, and then I want to hear what Sam has to say, but this is why I'm really happy we're having this conversation. This is why I like psychology and talking about relationships so much, because I think this type of conversation, it will be more beneficial to us and anyone else who hears it than 50 of the top theological conversations we've had on the Discord. These are much more embodied and real and practical. And it's not that they're unrelated to all those abstracted idea conversations, but this is where this is where Christian practice and being like Christ, this is where you really get it, in my experience. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be Christian in your context that you're talking about right here? And it's because it's hard to walk that anyhow. Okay, sorry.
Okay, I've been quiet for a little bit. First off, just kind of reacting to what Tripp said. I think that you're absolutely right that like a lot of emotional manipulation is taking advantage of someone's empathy and care for you, and overplaying perhaps the things, like over dramatizing some things that you feel, such that you can get a slightly larger empathy reaction from them. Like, you don't want to make me feel bad. Okay, you're making me feel 6 out of 10 bad. I'm going to act like you're making me 9 or 10 out of bad to get you to stop more quickly. But I'm sort of, I'm manipulating you a little bit and taking advantage of the fact that you fundamentally care about me.
Yeah, or I'm acting. Yeah, I'll just a quick interrupt. I feel like also what I do is I act like the 5 out of 10 bad isn't my baseline, right? Like, it's all because of you. This isn't like an insecurity that I'm bringing to the table in this relationship. This is something that you're bringing to the table, and it's all your fault. So even if I am like at an 8 out of 10, and I'm not exaggerating, a lot of that is me. And a lot of that is just like an insecurity that I'm bringing here, and I'm laying it all on your shoulders and telling you to get rid of it for me, right? So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like that's the other part of it. It's not just exaggerating it; it's exaggerating their role in it too.
And then I think another kind of family of emotionally manipulative behaviors that I'm sure Tripp will relate to a lot. Or I won't say that. I'm not going to prejudge you.
I'm sure I will. Yeah.
The invalidating someone else's feelings by claiming to have some sort of clear-headed high ground or something like that. Like, you are overreacting. You are not seeing things clearly. You are acting emotionally. I'm acting calmly and rationally. The facts don't care about your feelings, and I know the facts, and you're just feeling things. That sort of, it's not quite gaslighting. Like gaslighting is where you try and undermine someone's epistemology by getting them to think that
making them feel crazy. Yeah, making them try to feel crazy, which is different than like, that's not what I'm trying to get you to see clearly as I see things. Like that's right. More my like,
emotionlessly, clearly.
Oh yeah, totally. I am an emotionless robot. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yes, and so it's not quite gaslighting in terms of trying to get someone to doubt their understanding of the facts of the matter and basically undermine their self-assured epistemology or something like that. But it is sort of getting them to doubt their motivations or something like that, or doubt the genuineness or the validity of their feelings, such that you don't need to take their concerns as seriously, perhaps. And I think this is probably something that more commonly husbands do to their wives than vice versa. But it is a form of emotional manipulation to try and discount the validity and importance or relevance of someone else's feelings.
Yeah, I've noticed I do that to my husband sometimes when he does react to something, and then I overreact to his overreaction. So it's like, oh my goodness, how could you respond that way? And it's like, I've reacted more strongly to lots of smaller things than you just reacted to this, whatever it was. But using that to make them feel insecure about how they reacted, about how he's reacted to something. And
yeah, you're clearly out of line with the situation.
Like, whoa.
So therefore, we're going to put you outside the category of what we need to care about right now. And I get what I want because I'm level-headed.
Yep. And that'll mess with your mind when someone does that to you.
guess so. Another thing that makes me, I'm just trying to think about why I act the way I do in some of these things. And one of my frustrations is when if I see someone who says that they care about something, right? So take like the love languages. Someone who says that, like, I'm a physical affection person, but they never give physical affection. They're just always like wanting it, or say that they want it or whatever. Like, I have a really strong reaction to that. And I feel like I use it also as an excuse to invalidate what the person's feeling. Right. So like, I instead of trying to understand what's going on, I just more like, you're just a hypocrite. You don't really want, like, you say you want this, but you don't really want it. You don't act like you want it. It'd be very strange if I said, listen, I really love holding hands, but I never want to hold your hand. That would be very strange. And so I feel like I don't know to what degree that also like counts as emotional manipulation, but it is something that I do. And I don't, that's another thing that I'm struggling with, is to what degree, again, I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I walk these lines? Because I'm not, so in some of these things I'm like, I'm not totally wrong, but I was also like so clearly unaware of my own emotional manipulation. It's making me question like what else I really know, and how right or wrong I am in all of these things. So I don't know if you guys have experienced something similar. Sometimes I feel like I'm being gaslit by the world whenever I look out at it. So I don't know.
I'm having a hard time. So I have thoughts and questions about your situation, Tripp, but I'm having a hard time even thinking. So like what I'm trying to think about right now is, how do I emotionally manipulate? And this is just the honest truth of where I am. I don't know. Like I can't think of any way that I emotionally manipulate, which is almost more terrifying to me, because I'm sure I do. And so I don't know what that means. I think so. I have a question for you, but then also I think one of the best ways for me to think about this is, and these are things that we talk about within like Discord and Bridges of Meaning and Paul Vanderklay World, and it's a big Jordan Peterson thing, but I don't, there's a guy that I meet with locally here. We've started meeting up again. And something that we often talk about is that, no matter, like even Tripp earlier when you were saying, like, I don't know if sometimes with your judgments of your wife, if she's sinning or if you're sinning, and sometimes she is. And I've almost gotten to the point in my relationships or with my wife, and this is where I try to be, and it's hard. It's really hard to be, is that I try to almost not even do any of that assessment, because it's somewhat irrelevant, really. Because number one, no matter what, if they are sinning, what are you going to do about it? Like, call them out on it? Like, what does that do? Like, it's just, all it is an attempt to get the upper hand. Like, you're wrong here, so stop doing that, which doesn't work. That, no, that doesn't help their repentance. And I actually don't. This is basically where I'm at. This is why I talk about, like, why I love Jordan Peterson so much and telling the truth thing. And I think this is really hard to do. Like, even in my relationships with my wife, I try to, even if she is maybe wrong about something, which I try to not even analyze, which is hard, because that's where your mind instantly wants to go. I mean, you want to go to analyzing who's right and who's wrong in this situation. And then if I'm right, you stop doing it. But like, that just doesn't ever work. And so I try to just completely stop that game and think, like, what can I do in this situation to embody Christ in this situation? And I think that's what speaking the truth is, and speaking the truth in love is that, I think if you can get to that place where, even if, like, say my wife is sinning against me in some way, like, if I and I don't think my wife would mind me sharing this, but like she tends to be more passive aggressive, and when we get into fights and she gets mad, like that's the go-to. And I don't know, it'd be an interesting conversation to just be like, I wonder what she's trying to accomplish in that, because even with you, Tripp, what I'm thinking is like, why don't you want to be vulnerable? Like, what are you afraid of? What's going on? What are you defending? Because anytime, Dax Shepard talks about this all the time, which is good. When he gets in a fight with his wife in his podcast, and this is why I love Dax Shepard, he says he immediately knows, and he's learned this through AA, is that he's afraid. He's afraid of something. Anytime you become defensive, you're afraid. You're defending something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a really good thing to say, like, what are you afraid of? And so, like, with my wife, when she becomes angry and passive aggressive and essentially is like lashing out in a passive aggressive way, I don't know what she's afraid of there. But I think all that I can do in that situation, I think, is not just, I don't think the game of you're being passive aggressive and that's wrong and you should stop. That's goes nowhere in my experience. It never helps. I think the thing that you can do is, if you can, in humility and love, say, please don't do that. I don't think that's a helpful thing, and that's not a loving thing, and I really don't want you to do that with me. Like, if you can say that in a really non-aggressive, non-manipulative way, I think it can move the relationship very slowly. Like, even if it's a degree in the right path, and then over time that bears fruit, but it's slow growth and it's hard. And that's why relational, family, marital conflicts like this are the money of teaching you Christianity, I think. I don't know.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, some of the main conflicts that my husband and I have had is just from being different, and the insecurities that come from those differences having to interact in a family situation. His family has certain values, and those are ranked in different ways than, say, how I was raised. And so when those conflict, both of us would get defensive about which thing we should value more. And then you can start to attack the other person's, and then you start to feel insecure, because you think, well, maybe I have these things off. But if you don't want to admit that, you don't want to talk through it, then the immediate reaction is just to attack their ranking of the values. And when we've been able to work through that, we've actually both grown a whole lot. But just to summarize that, I think differences turning into insecurities are what have caused a lot of the emotional manipulation in relationships that I've been in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is where, like, I'm thinking about it. It can be really hard to draw the line between emotional manipulation and otherwise healthier, constructive conflict resolution,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not like you don't get to care about your own emotions. It's not like if your spouse is doing something that bothers you, you don't get to bring that up or something like that, right? Like, a marriage is always going to be this constant sort of interchange, compromise, negotiation with another person who's different than you. That's sort of part of the whole point. It's just like trying to draw lines around the bounds between, the good version of dealing with that difference and bad ways of dealing with that difference. And it's fuzzy, right? It can be really fuzzy.
This is what frustrates me. I want rules. I want to know, like, no, if I do it in this way, it means I'm not being emotionally manipulative. And I do it in this way, it means that I am. Like, I want something clearer, and it frustrates the hell out of me that it's not.
The law does not bring about the righteousness that God requires, Tripp.
Oh, I know. Thank you.
It's more, so I've been thinking a lot about this. Brett Sockold, in a couple of his talks, has, and I don't know if this is an Aquinas thing, I think he said it was, you'd know, Tripp, but he's talked about something that he tries to do. He said it explicitly. I've been wanting to re-listen to it, and talk about it on Discord or something in his talk with Paul, but he says there's within dialogue, and this is very much like a dialogos kind of a thing. He says, like, no matter what the other person is saying in a conversation or in a debate or in a relationship, he says, if you believe that they are really speaking some level of truth, and some part of them is trying to get at the truth, like if you assume that no matter what, and obviously there's a spectrum there's people that are really healthy that are doing that in a clear and articulate way and not being manipulative, and then there are people who are really broken, sinful addicts. But it's kind of like that quote that's often attributed to Chesterton, but not necessarily, I don't even think he said it, but like everyone is seeking God, even the one who knocks on the door of a brothel, or the Blaise Pascal quote, like all men seek happiness, that's without exception, even the man that hangs himself. If all people are really seeking truth and goodness, but it's just to varying degrees bent and off, if you can focus as much as possible on that, even if it's just a flicker, even if it's just an ember, the truth that other person is trying to communicate and whatever they want, even if it's coming out as aggression and fear and manipulation, like something about what they're doing. Like, this is what I try to do with Carl, honestly. Like, Carl is, I mean, in a lot of ways, just kind of ridiculous. Just like off the hinge. But I'm like, but why he is like that is because in his mind, he's such a staunch defender of truth. He loves the truth because he loves people, and he doesn't want to see people manipulated by false ideologies that will lead to the lack of human flourishing. That's why he's doing it. Like, I think he's doing it in an extremely unhealthy way, but like, if I focus on that allows me to, I think, more so walk in the fruit of the Spirit in relating to him in as much as I can. And that kind of grace and mercy and love, I think, opens people up, and it creates space. It's a feminine spirituality versus the narrowing, like, you're wrong, you're an idiot, moron. Like that does not open people up to dialogos and love and like Trinitarian harmony and a bridge. So, what are you afraid of, Tripp? Can I ask you that?
Lots of things, but I'm afraid of rejection. I think I'm afraid that I'm not good enough, that that I'm not worth loving, that I'll be betrayed, I'll be left, I'll be abandoned. That's kind of my fear.
If they see you for the truth?
Yeah, if they see, if I don't earn it, right? Like, it's very much like I got to earn things, and so I need to be like smart. I need to know things. I need to like earn a good living. I need to be present with the kids. I need to do all these things, and if I don't do them, then I'm not worth loving. And so any criticism just comes across as just like biting at that, right? Because what it's telling me is I'm not those things.
My husband really struggles with that same thing, and I didn't know that for the longest time. He would deal with those feelings by criticizing me, and so that's all I saw. And that, well, actually, something the Enneagram really helped me to realize is that the self-critical voice inside of his head was 50 times stronger than what was actually coming out towards me. And that when I started to notice that reaction towards me was actually a signal that he's dealing with this in his own head towards himself, gave me a lot more empathy towards and not having to react so strongly to his criticisms of what I'm doing, because I'm realizing that it's not so personal. It's not just because of me. It's something that he's really having to work through.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like an internal thing for me too. Like I'm on a 6 or a 7 out of 10 in terms of feeling this way, like just kind of baseline, I think. And so like any kind of criticism from someone close to me, and it's a weird thing that I'm trying to figure out, but I'm very disagreeable, and people who I don't know or are not close to me, I don't really care what they think or criticisms and that kind of stuff. Like it just doesn't bother me very much, and so I always thought that this wasn't really a problem that I had. This wasn't really a weakness that I had or an insecurity. But with my wife, I really have it, and with people that I'm close to, I really have it, and it's like things bother me, like small criticisms and that kind of stuff bother me to a degree that's it's unreasonable, but what it says is that it's internal. It's me doing it. Or it's me like I'm just so raw and sensitive there, that it makes any, like just a slight touch, it's so tender that I just like it hurts really bad. And so what I do then is I emotionally manipulate. Then I bring up how bad this hurts me in order to get her to stop doing it. Not to get her to understand where I'm coming from or to try to like enter into my vulnerability or to bridge connection or anything else like that. No, it's to demand an end to it. So anyway, because like I think I'm just afraid of being left. I think I'm afraid of being betrayed. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough.
I think a whole big complicated piece of this is healthy conflict resolution, and I feel like that's like a majority of what it means to have a good marriage, is to be able to develop the skill of healthy conflict resolution. And I don't think there's any like guidebook or handbook or set of rules, sorry Tripp, that like really any couple can follow. Like a big thing that happened like when my wife and I had been married for like 2 years is we just suddenly realized we had an incredibly different definition of what it meant to properly apologize to someone, right? And we're like, oh, you think a good apology is that? I think a good apology is this. Oh, why didn't we ever, like, that explains so much, and we still don't have the same standard definition of apology. That's a compromise in progress. But
wait, so I want to hover on that, because that's a disagreement that my wife had a few months ago about the apology thing, because we have different definitions of apology too, and what I realized that my definition was coming from was I'm essentially wanting her to admit that she did something wrong, say she's sorry, and the implicit promise is she'll never do that again, so I don't have to feel this way, right? Like that's why, like, and I don't, obviously I wasn't asked to say this because
dose of remorse in there too, to really
I want remorse because then I believe I'm reassured that she's like, that I won't feel this again, right?
I want you to say this. I'm sorry, I will never make you feel feelings again.
Right, exactly. That's what I want. And so anyway, so she's like, why do you care so much whether or not, like, I'm saying I understand why you reacted that way and whatever and that kind of stuff. I was like, yeah, but you're not saying you're sorry really for it. And it's because like what I'm wanting is her to, like, essentially, not in words, because if I asked this explicitly, I'd have to be aware of it, and that would be ridiculous to ask someone to promise to never do something again. But that's what I was wanting, and that's why I want that, like, I did something wrong and I feel bad about it apology, because then I have like some reassurance that, like, I won't have to feel this way.
That even helps me understand my own needs and requirements in an apology better. This thanks Tripp.
Well, I didn't realize that until, like, again, like, I connected that argument with the emotional manipulation. I was like, oh, that's why the I'm sorry thing, that's why it matters so much to me. Like, that's what I'm asking. That's really what I'm asking for, is to not ever feel vulnerable again. And that's why I want it in that way, because that's what that means to me.
And that's what remorse is. Remorse is like something like the promise of not needing to fear this happening again or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. But here's the thing, obviously I would never say that because that's a ridiculous thing to say. Like no one, but I'm, you know, go back to, some of the things Luke talked about. I'm acting that out like as if like I believe that's what I'm doing, right? I would never say it because it'd be ridiculous, but that's what I'm believing.
Most of the
in
things we
doing that.
really believe are pretty ridiculous if you said them out loud and they were true. So this has made me realize something that I do that's I don't know if it's emotionally manipulative, but it's self-manipulative and maybe manipulative to my wife. So in our relationship, when it comes to apologies, so my wife and I, we're kind of emotionally, we're almost the opposite of most male female stereotypical relationships. So whenever you hear sermons or Paul or anyone say guys are usually like this, emotionally it's like nope. I'm in every small group I've ever been, like it's me and all the wives and women relate relationally, and all the guys are over there relating, and Jen somewhat relationally can be more like that too. So it's kind of flipped. That's why I'm a housewife. But one of the things that I will do is because I don't know if it's because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram or like intimacy or vulnerability, that's easy for me. It's not that hard to be vulnerable or admit that I'm wrong. Largely, I'm wrong all the time. Like I don't really care. I don't get a lot of my self-identity about like thinking that I have some kind of like just unpenetrable outer armor. Like that's not my strength at all. My strength is almost the opposite. So what I will do is often in fights and things is I'm much more prone to say I was wrong or what I did wrong or what I'm doing wrong or I got mad or I did this whatever. So I will admit all my errors just very quickly and very easily. But then that gives me the moral high ground. Like I'm admitting all my errors. I'm saying all these things that I'm wrong. I'm wrong here. I'm wrong here. I'm wrong here. I'm wrong here. Where are you wrong? You're not admitting anywhere that you're wrong. So
I do that too. Exactly.
I'm moral high ground.
Yeah, I will throw stuff out there. I will just be like, let me just lay it on the table, all the ways that I'm wrong. Do you have anything to say? And then it's like, then again, I'm not repenting for the sake of repenting or like, I'm not like really trying to own my own sin. I'm doing it so that she does something in response, and that's manipulative. Even if I kind of mean it, right? We're all duplicitous in some of these ways, right? There's always like a mixed motivation. It's not like I feel like I'm lying, and I should repent for this after all, and she should repent for what she does after all. But why am I saying it? What is my primary motivation? And that's where like I want a rule, but I feel like it's not a rule in terms of me bringing up how I feel or my repentance or whatever. It's more like I have to really be cognizant of my motivations when I do it, and it's less what I say or how I feel than what my motivation is. But that worries me because I don't know what my motivations are a lot, right? Like I wasn't aware that this was my motivation for asking for apology. I wasn't aware of all of these things, and so that really scares me that like I could be continuing to do it, just fooling myself. And I want like a test that I can apply to know whether or not I'm doing it.
This is why these relationships are so great, because like all of this, and I think this is something that we all know intuitively, there is no test and there is no modeling, because your left brain map of this situation of your wife and all these situations of your spouse is incredibly insufficient, because that person is infinitely complex. I'm infinitely complex. What is motivating me? I don't know. And so trying to discern this is why marriage is inherently, the way that people act in a healthy relationship is inherently iconic. It has to be, or else it won't work. If you treat your spouse like an idol, like a static thing that then you can manipulate and use and model and get a rule and a formula, it won't work and they won't like it.
Something I was thinking about, just going back to the apology thing. I think a lot of times if I feel like my intentions were different than what was experienced, that I should not have to take responsibility for that. And that's not true. It's still, and we've both had to learn that a lot, that if you experienced this feeling based on my action, even if it was not my intention, I can still apologize for that, which is hard to do.
Yeah. Oh man, this is just a perennial conversation that my wife and I have about the importance of intention versus consequence, and when is that relevant, when is that not relevant. Oh, that is a deep conversation that I don't even know where to start or finish with that. Well,
then you get into the whole apology, like, well, I'm sorry that you felt that way.
Yeah. I'm sorry you're so silly.
Yeah.
I apologize
That's
for you
on
being a
you.
ridiculous person.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Don't you think there's a way, I think, to relate to someone where, because, well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So like your intentions, again, like judging mine or judging theirs is somewhat irrelevant. And then how someone reacts to that, like it's not a right or wrong thing. Like their feelings are legitimate, even if they're not 100% pure. So like, I think there is a way in which you can relate to someone where you have, in as much as you see things clearly and understand pure intentions, they take that in a way which is not at all the way that you intended and are offended. And that's a legitimate thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yet have that not be just like a like a static black and white thing, but also like that's legitimate, this is legitimate, and they both need work. You know, like it's not just a simple judgment of like right or wrong. Like that's why I think the game of like of the analyzing who is right and who is wrong doesn't work. I mean, it's a game of winners and losers, which I don't think can ever work in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to bring it back to to bring it back to the emotional measure, I agree, like the right and wrong, because also like, again, like analyzing intentions, you don't even know your own intentions, right? Much less the other person's intentions. And so like if you had asked me 2 weeks ago what my intention is to bring up, you know, some of the things I've been bringing up, I wouldn't have said, well, I'm trying to emotionally manipulate my wife to get her to do what I would say. But like today I would say, yeah, that's at least a large part of what I'm doing, right? And that's awful. So like analyzing intentions is not helpful either, because you don't really, I mean, you can reflect maybe on your own intentions and try to understand them a little bit more, and invite the other person to reflect on their own intentions and try to understand a little bit more, but you're never going to answer that. And also, like, to go to like a Calvinist term, like there's total depravity here. And total depravity is not like like people misunderstand the term a lot. They think that it's all evil. What it really means is that like everything about you is kind of tainted by some degree of evil. And so even when you're totally right in an argument and you've totally been sinned against, it's not as if like you're totally right and like your motivations are pure in bringing it up. And it's not as if the other person's intentions were totally bad whenever they did the thing that made you feel the way that you did. So I agree, like focusing on right and wrong and intentions is kind of a fool's errand sometimes. And it's not super helpful. I don't know. But I do that. Like that's just naturally where my brain goes. That's what I want to know. I want to know, am I right here or am I wrong? Right. And you know, I don't know, like it's just naturally like the rut that my brain goes into, and it prevents, I think, a deeper connection. And what it does is it invites me to sometimes to take responsibility for things that are not, to idolize my marriage and idolize my wife, and also take responsibility for things that that maybe aren't mine to own. But then I start to get a little bit bitter, and that just feeds into my motivation to be emotionally manipulative, right? Because then I'm taking responsibility, I'm taking the full blame for something that's not totally my fault. But then it frustrates me that it's not getting better because it's not totally my fault and I can't fix everything anyway. And so then it motivates me then to like just bring the hammer down of my emotions on something to fix it, and to make sure that I don't feel this way anymore. And so that's part of my motivation. It's like this, almost like this, and this like God complex where I think I need to take responsibility for anything and understand everything about myself and my wife and whatever and fix it all. And then when I can't, I get frustrated. And so now I'm just going to point out all the ways that she's hurting me so that she stops hurting me. And it's just like this cycle, and which then causes an argument, which then makes me take it responsibility for things that I shouldn't take responsibility for, which makes me then want to use my emotions again. And it's just like this negative cycle that I get into, that I didn't know that I was in. And it's easy, once it's pointed out to you, it's kind of like, how the hell did I not see that? But yeah, I've been in it my whole life, I think.
On speaking of the gap between the intentions that we're aware of and intentions that we're not aware of. One thing that doesn't work well is using the hermeneutic of suspicion on your spouse and trying to be like, you think you're doing this for this reason, but I know you better. I can see that you're actually doing it for this reason, and exploiting that gap to sort of undermine them or something like that. That doesn't really work very well. I don't have much of a point beyond that.
No, that's true. I do that all the time. That's probably my wife's biggest complaint about me, is that or one of them. There's lots. But that because I am really like, I love relationships and I think about them all the time and I analyze all these dynamics and things, and is that I have this kind of smug superior analysis of like understanding the situation and like what she's doing and what's motivating her and all of that kind of stuff, because which isn't a good thing. I was thinking this, and
well, does it?
No, it doesn't. I was thinking this morning on my run, and I think this is true, and I think it relates to this, and what you just said, Tripp, is I was wondering, I think it relates to this, but it's a larger frame. I think a lot of what life is about is moving away from analyzing facts into recognizing patterns. And I think that's almost like the analysis of who is right and who is wrong is like analyzing facts. Like, it's kind of like the Christian Sam Harris version is like, well, is this on the right side of history? And are these all the correct facts? And is it scientifically verifiable? Like, were you wrong? Or was I right? Or were your motivations pure or were mine pure? Instead, I think it's better, especially and not even in a self-judgmental way, but realizing the only thing you can do is take the speck out of your own eye rather than trying to do it in your spouse, is recognizing the patterns, because that's very what you were just talking about, that Tripp. Like, I do this and I do this and then this happens. I do that over and over and over. And that's my fights with my wife too. Like, a lot of times how they will end up will be like, which is no different than my kids. It's like the exact same thing. It's just it's a bigger vocabulary with more, I don't know, layers of complication. But it's, you always do this. You always do this. Well, that's a pattern. You always repeat these patterns and you always repeat these patterns, but that's because we're spiritual creatures, and patterns are spirits that just it's the underlying thing that brings forth the reinstantiation through time. That's what a pattern is, And I think when you start discerning those, which is, I think what I would argue is largely what we're talking about, then you can use your analysis to be like, okay, what is going on? What's the idolatry? Why do I keep instantiating this pattern? What am I trying to do? I don't know.
Yeah. Tripp, here's a rule. Don't ever say you always do X. That's wrong.
I learned that pretty early on. The always and never are not good words.
Yeah.
Something that's been helpful for me, and I still don't do it very well, but it is very helpful when I stop and think about it, is most of the time when I get frustrated in relationships, it's because I'm being selfish. I want my own needs met. I want something to change because, I don't want to feel the way I'm feeling. I'm insecure, et cetera, et cetera. And if I can intentionally shift my mindset to thinking about what, say in this instance, my spouse needs, and that's not easy to do when you're when you're hurt or when you're frustrated or whatnot, but trying to just trying to change your perspective to an outward one versus an inward one is something that is always helpful when I can make myself do it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and that's why I want my motivation whenever I bring up my concerns or whatever to be, I want the end result for us to be closer. I want the connection. I want that to be the end result. Like whether or not and that can't happen also if I'm putting something on the other person that they can't really give me, right? That like there's some insecurities that I have that are mine, and like the other person's not going to be able to take them away from me, really. Like they can give me maybe a salve or something and reassure me that that's not how they think about me and that kind of stuff, and trying to encourage me, but like it's going to come back. And if I keep blaming them for it never fully going away, then the end result is when I bring stuff up, it won't be for the purposes of connection, because I'm going to start blaming that person for having to bring it up, right? And then it's their fault. And so then they need to change. And so then I get back into the emotional manipulation thing again. And so that's what I want my motivation to be, is a closer, I want like the connection to get stronger as a result of me bringing up something that I care about or I'm concerned. But it's so easy to like look at the other person and like bring it up and have an expectation of what they're going to do on the other end of it, and not like judge them if they don't react the way that you wanted them to. And so that's the part that's hard for me. And so I didn't know if other people struggled with that, but I have a real hard try. Like I want to bring it up. I don't want to like not bring it up, but I want to bring it up without the expectation or the demand on the other person. I'll say it differently. I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, I know that there's a part of me that's going to like be really hurt and upset if the other person doesn't respond in some way to what I'm saying right now. And I don't know. I'm sure I just need to sit in that, and be comfortable in that. I mean, that's what Jesus did for us, right? Is, he took on pain and rejection, willingly. And that's what I'm called to do too. But it's really hard to do it and not get bitter, and resentful. And then to try and emotionally manipulate the other person so that you don't feel that way, which will only make the problem worse, obviously.
Well, and I think a lot of times we want people to be mind readers too. Like I want someone to know what I need. I want my husband to know what I need. I don't want him to tell you. Then that's,
Which is really hard when we don't even really know what we need or want, right?
100%. That's me too. I'm just like, I wish you knew me intimately enough where like we didn't even need language.
You don't know.
That's what I want. Yeah. And that's a lot of what I was wondering how much of this you guys think is just, because this is a convicting thing for me, how much of it is just megalomania. Like I essentially want sometimes my wife to be me, but not me, you know, like I want you to be, like I want you to care, because that's a big thing for me as a highly emotional four. As it's like, that's my judgment on everyone all the time, is like, no one cares as much as me. It's impossible. Like I care more than everyone about everything all the time. And so that's like my just judgment against everyone is, that's the reason that's like my excuse for being crazy. Is like, I'm just like, it's because I care so much. That's why I'm crazy. But then part of it, this is something I realized in talking with my local buddy here, is that if my metric for how much you care and how much you love me is just, I mean, this is a subtle thing. It's just like acting like I would act in a situation. Well, then you've set up the whole analysis to just be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like my wife isn't me. She's not gonna act how I would act in a situation. And so, of course, so you've set up a pattern that's always gonna fail, always lead to the same judgment, always lead to bitterness.
Also, like, would it, even if she did, would you be happy with that?
No, I don't even like myself most of the time.
Right. Exactly. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Well, and I think sometimes we can set our spouse or friend or whoever it is up for failure in that way to give us an excuse to see, he reacted that way, but really we, made the situation where they had no choice. Or
yeah. I think that's absolutely right, Sarah. I think that's another pattern of emotional manipulation, is like, I feel like this is a bad thing to do, but virtually all couples I know do this, is you keep kind of like a running tally of who's been more wrong recently, right? Who's more in the doghouse than the other person at the current time. And that sort of means that the person less in the doghouse gets more of what they want or something like that. It's really hard not to do that. And then even worse than doing that is like setting up the other person to fail so that they get more in the bad category than you are currently, so that you can use that against them. Oh, yeah, that's the thing.
And often our setting up isn't even like a conscious thing. Like we're not even necessarily like, oh, I'm going to intentionally do this. It's more like just having an expectation that the other person can't meet. Like even if they wanted to and they weren't doing anything wrong, like if you have the expectation of the other person to make you feel a certain way or to do something or whatever, that no one's ever going to be able to meet that, because it's not actually an external thing, it's an internal one. You are setting them up for failure and then congratulating yourself for kind of congratulating yourself for being so righteous, whereas your spouse is they're the ones that are the problem. And yeah, so that's an emotional manipulation. Again, that's like, I don't think most of this is like conscious for most people. I think maybe sociopaths do things like this, but I don't think most people do it intentionally. I just think that they don't realize what they're doing. They're setting up idols for themselves and their spouse, and then shaking their fist at the idol whenever the idol can't be God for them, right?
That reminds me. So love languages, right? So like my favorite love language is words of affirmation, the one to receive. But the hard thing about that is like it requires creativity, right? You can't just
you don't want to get repetitive. Yeah.
Right. You can't just say, "Oh, Sam, good job tying your shoes today. That knot held up all day." Right? Like, no, that doesn't count. It needs to be something creative. It needs to be something I haven't noticed before, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? There's no formula on, if you follow steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you will have successfully made a good, positive affirmation of me today. where my wife happens to be the sort of person who loves things that come in steps 1 through 5 that are, infallible and easy to follow and procedural and all that sort of thing. And that's, the setting up for failure.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, this is one of my complaints about my marriage is that my wife is kind of a words of affirmation person, but she doesn't really give words of affirmation. So again, I go hypocrite, don't like whatever. But I think that what it is, and so like the creativity and that kind of stuff is a big kind of complaint for her. I wonder, we're getting a little bit off topic, but I wonder whether or not like the words of affirmation for people who really love that, it's less about the words, it's more about the idea that the other person is thinking of them and paying attention to them and that kind of stuff. And so like if the words are repetitive, you can do that without actually doing that. And so the words, like it seems to like that's something I'm trying to figure out. Why does it mean so much that it's new and unique and something that maybe they didn't see in themselves or something like that? And I feel like it's more like you want to be paid attention to and feel like you're being thought about.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It requires, yeah, like you said, paying attention and noticing. Because I need words of affirmation as well, but it's really hard to give me words of affirmation that really mean something to me, which is terrible. For my poor husband.
Well, it's discouraging to someone like me. Like I'm not that way. It's discouraging to someone like me if I'm trying to do that and then I do it and it feels like it doesn't mean anything on the other side. So it's almost like I'm getting negative reinforcement. Like
and
I
then
don't
you
even
don't want to try it again.
I don't want to try it again because like I tried to give you a compliment and it didn't, like not only did it not land, like you're kind of mad about the poor like compliment that I gave you.
This is yeah. This is where I relate to the stereotypical female energy this so much, because I'm the same way. It's not so much like I'm not really so much a words of affirmation person. I am a little bit. I love gifts, but I like gifts that aren't just
too. I like gifts too, but if it's like just a generic gift,
Right,
no, for sure.
It's the same motivation. You'd be like, did they think about me? And
yes,
what do I
you have
like?
to be
That
known.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
You have to be
you
known.
know what
like,
I want more than what I want. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Because then you know me, and it's an intimacy thing. So you're paying attention to me again in like an iconic way because I'm a dynamic person. Rather, you want a static transactional thing. You want to give me a word of affirmation so you can check it off your list. That's empty and meaningless to me. I don't want it. It's going to gross me out. It's probably better if you didn't have said anything. So that I feel the same way with gifts because I'm a gift person. And so this is my poor wife. It's the same thing. So it's like she can give me a gift, but like unless you gave me the kind of gift that says like you're really paying attention to me and know what I like and know what I care. And imagine how hard I am. Like think about food ethics and like clothes ethics and things and my esoteric musical taste.
How dare you?
Right. No, exactly. I'll just be like, and yeah, I'm the worst. So, but it's hard. But I think the connection is that it all comes. We want to be known and loved. I think that's what it is. I mean, at its core, and for different people, and that's the great thing is how the most helpful, the Enneagram, Sarah and I talk a lot about the Enneagram. The Enneagram has been more helpful to me probably relationally than almost any other tool. And I think it's because it shows just how different people are. It's such a dynamic thing. It shows how different they are, but then also how similar they are. It's just such a useful tool that it's helped me just realize. So like my wife's a 9 on the Enneagram, I'm a 4, but it's really helped me realize like, okay, different things. Like I'm in the heart triad. My wife is in the instinct triad. Well, I won't go into it too in depth. she doesn't like me over analyzing again until like getting my moral high ground of knowing where everything is. But we're very different creatures. What we want and how we both want to be known and loved, but then how that looks is very different. Very different.
So if I just sent you a gift card on your birthday every year, that wouldn't do it for you?
Yeah, if you sent me like an Outback Steakhouse gift card, that would probably just make me feel really loved.
Okay.
JK.
I've never been to an Outback Steakhouse.
Really?
I'm saying that mainly because I don't like chains. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that we should talk about with emotional manipulation? This is more just me like realizing something that I'd never known about myself and wanting to get feedback and perspective. This was helpful to me. Thank you guys for joining. Anything else?
I feel like the one thing I was going to ask Tripp is I feel like you're a fairly open and intentional guy. So like even this I imagine you having a conversation somewhat like this with your wife, which even though you were maybe somewhat blind to a lot of stuff before, I feel like she would be very encouraged by just a conversation like this.
Yeah, I mean, we did have a conversation about it, kind of right around the time that I messaged the Discord about it. So it's not, yeah, there's some things like some background with my wife that makes it, I think it was appreciated, and I think it did make her feel better, like she wasn't being like gaslit and that kind of stuff. Like, she, like, I think sometimes she feels kind of like she's being crazy and that kind of thing. And so and I didn't realize what I was doing, and so it was a hard conversation. Like this kind of broke me to know that I've been making her feel this way, and I've been doing this to her for basically our entire, I mean, we've been married 10 years. It was 10 years in December. So yeah, it kind of like, I was kind of disgusted with myself. I still am disgusted with myself and ashamed of it and kind of broken about it. But I think it did mean something to her. Obviously there's like a healing involved that needs to happen. And the thing that scares me, again, like this feeds into my fear, is that the healing and the forgiveness and a lot of this stuff is not totally up to me. Like I can be totally genuine and really, want to be different and to try and be cognizant of these things. But it's not totally up to me either. And I can't make an idol out of her and our marriage. And so I need to like kind of be vulnerable and like rest in that. And that's again, like my my desire is to be emotionally manipulative so I don't have to do that, right? And so like even in me recognizing my emotional manipulation and repenting of it, my instinct is to be emotionally manipulative to make sure that I don't get kind of hurt or unfairly criticized or whatever. Like that's my that's kind of like my MO, and I have to really fight it and really like reflect on what it is that I'm doing and saying before I say it, and won't do it perfectly, but we did have that conversation, and it was hard, obviously, but I do think she appreciated it.
I think recognizing those patterns is huge, and that way both can see them when they come back up.
Yeah, and one of the things that when I said it, even, and this just is so perfect, like it's just like chef's kiss of like the sin that I was engaging in, is that whenever she said it, she responded, "Okay, I feel like you're saying this so that I say that I'm doing the same thing to you," which was 100% not my motivation in saying it, but I was like, yeah, I totally get why you would think that. I actually don't think, like, she has sin too. That's not one of them. I don't think that I'm being emotionally manipulated the same way that I was doing her. So that actually, not only did I not want her to I did not want her to say that. I don't even think that. But the fact that she thought that just reinforces just how much I was doing that to her and bringing up something in order to get her to respond in a certain way. And it just reinforced just how like screwed up I was. in this way without actually knowing it. And so, this was helpful to me. I know a Discord is primarily a kind of a guy centric, and I think there's a lot of guys like me on the personality scale on that Discord. And so to whatever extent, hopefully you can learn from how screwed up I am. And then you can avoid people like Luke and Sarah in different ways. And Sam, I think it's the same way. He's just nicer and quieter. Okay, this was helpful. Anything else? Sorry, what was that?
Sam's faultless.
Yeah. No. Nope.
Okay, this was helpful, everyone. I will stop the recording now.